Hey, Alex, I wanted to tell you about this photography exhibit at the Eskenazi Museum.
Huh, I was just over there. I didn't see anything.
Yeah, well, it's kind of hidden. You have to go up all those angled stairs, third floor, across the balcony.
That's a trek.
You could also just take the elevator. Either way, you gotta do it. It's a collection of large-scale images of Lebanese women by photographer Rania Matar. Considering what's going on in Lebanon right now, it's really timely.
Glad to know about it. I'll check it out.
I just wish there was some way we could let more people know about this.
Yeah. You know, we could start a radio show. It could be about art and culture and ideas.
Yeah, we should make it a podcast too. Maybe get stuff on social media?
Yeah, could focus on Southern Indiana. From our community, for our community.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could get talented film students doing social media. It would be cool if we did other stuff.
It could be like a broadcast.
A broadcast.
Yeah.
Do you know where the word comes from?
This is Kate Young. Today on Nice Work, a conversation with photographer Rania Matar and contemporary art curator Layla Reichert. We're talking about Rania's latest exhibition at the Eskenazi Museum of Art on the IU Bloomington campus. The show features portraits of young women in Lebanon. The women are posing in abandoned buildings around Beirut or in natural landscapes like an apple orchard, an olive grove, or a field of poppies. The exhibit is called Where Do I Go? A question many young Lebanese women face in a country that's been through one crisis after another. From a 15-year civil war in the 1970s and 80s, to ongoing clashes with neighboring Israel, to a devastating port explosion in 2020, to political corruption and economic collapse. The current crisis includes war between Israel and Hezbollah, an Iranian-backed militia and political party in Lebanon. Close to 1 million Lebanese civilians have been displaced, and the Israeli military is currently attempting to occupy the south of Lebanon as a buffer zone. So the question for these young Lebanese women, where do I go, is as relevant as ever. Here's photographer Rania Matar.
I'm from Lebanon. I was born and raised during the Lebanese Civil War. I left Lebanon in 1984 to come and study in the United States. I had started my studies as in architecture, and I transferred to Cornell. And it was very difficult to leave, and I left because the situation got pretty bad in Lebanon. What happened in 1984 was when I left, I was at AUB, the American University of Beirut, and they had killed the American president of the university.
Oh my God, right.
There was the bombing of the Marines, and then the bombing of the American University, which was literally next to the architecture building where I was at the moment. And then the war came too close to home. So this is a lot of people who could afford or who were able to transfer did at that time. In 2019, there was a lot of protests in Lebanon against the corrupt government, against the sectarianism in the government and the whole constitution, and there was so much hope. So it was all these young people, and it was so beautiful to see because they would camp downtown, and you'll have a guy named Muhammad camping with a guy named Kevin. It's like they didn't care if anybody is Muslim, Shia, Sunni, Christian. It didn't matter. It was very, very invigorating. And then right after that, COVID happened, and the country shut down, and that was the end of that. And then the explosions happened. So the economy in Lebanon completely collapsed. People would wait 5 hours to fill gas in their car. It was actually heartbreaking how bad it got.
I was watching protests in 2019 on my phone, following friends, and it was, even for me, like as an American who was invested in the future of Lebanon, watching those protests, it was so galvanizing. And so many of my friends were out there. They were DJing, they were cooking together.
It was beautiful.
There was like this total collapse of the sectarianism and this kind of like, this is maybe the reckoning that Lebanon needed to move forward. And then, which made the tragedy of the explosion and the economic collapse and everything and COVID and the wars that happened so much more tragic because the hope was spiking right then, in a way that I think you hadn't seen following the history of the country in so long.
It was like a major slap in the face. So people who were on the street protesting, really, I mean, made you see what Lebanon could be. All of a sudden, they were just kind of thrown down on the floor, and many of them were at that moment. What happened since, eventually the country kind of, this country seems to always be able to do this, to kind of get out of the ashes and rebuild itself. And many of the women who had left came back.
Oh.
I mean, it's not easy to leave. So some of them came back. Things got better. There was hope. There was a woman I photographed who had a big tattoo on her back that says Kuwa, which means strength. And she got that tattoo right after the port explosions. When I saw her last fall at Paris Photo, her photo was exhibited. I'm like, I want to photograph your tattoo with your picture. And she had covered it with a gigantic flower. And she said, I'm in a much better place now. And I can't help but think of her now with what's happening.
And she's a photographer as well.
She's a photographer as well.
Yes,
so now it's like another set of dreams getting shattered again. But what's happening now is very tragic. I mean, a quarter of the population has been displaced. They're bluntly talking about occupying the South. Nobody's even pretending not to be saying it anymore. And people have been displaced from the southern suburb of Beirut. People sometimes don't realize it's a tiny country. So when they're bombing the southern suburb of Beirut, it's about 1.5 miles away from the center of Beirut.
Right.
So people are not sleeping all night and they're hearing it. So it's pretty bad. And the question, sadly, comes up again. Where do I go? Where do they go? The book was meant to be almost kind of published to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War, which was April 2025. Now we're April 2026, and things are worse than ever.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that context. I think that a lot of our listeners might not be familiar with all of these details, so I really appreciate having that because it really does inform how we look at the work in this show and in this book. I would really like for our listeners who have not seen the show, if we could describe it a little bit and talk about some of the photos and just how the work is laid out. Layla, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I suppose that is my job, right? Yeah, I mean, I was joking yesterday that it's very easy to curate very beautiful and meaningful work, but it's not. I mean, there are many challenges to it because the photos are so powerful uniquely on their own. They're, very individual. Usually it's just one woman at a time that you're collaborating with. Sometimes they're in architectural settings, like in buildings, many of those buildings abandoned, or they're outdoors, they're in nature, sort of immersed in the natural environment. Sometimes they're by the ocean, sometimes they're set against the sky, but there are these really captivating, very individual portraits of these young women that Rania has collaborated with in settings that are either individually meaningful to them or collectively meaningful to the identity of young Lebanese women. And, I'm sitting with Rania looking at this material in her studio in Boston. And I'm not actually thinking a lot about what the show will look like. I'm really just thinking, what are the images that I think will tell the story as I understand it, as I've followed it vicariously through Rania and through my own experiences being in Lebanon. What do I think will speak to someone who's outside of this story as well? So it was this multi-layer process of discovery, of editing, and putting together something that would be visually compelling, knowing that the work was going to be beautiful no matter what. And I'm not sure I described the show very well. There are two very bright red walls internally. Rania loves red, and there's a lot of red in her work. And her work is very strong, so it can actually, not all work can compete against bright red. Your work can. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I make the work, I edit the work, I kind of attach to the work. It's nice to come in a space and see how Layla curated it and put it together. And it felt like, now it's kind of out in the world. And I was really pleased. The show looks so beautiful. So I know we're talking about all the difficult things about Lebanon, but there's also so much beauty in Lebanon. And I hope that also comes through the images, because as we're talking about the difficult situation, there's also, again, it's a beautiful country. The textures are beautiful, the sea, the mountains, even the old walls that have witnessed layers and layers of history. But also these women give me so much hope. I mean, they're majestic. And I feel like, I hope the powers come through the images.
Yeah.
And the sense that they belong to this place, how either whether it's with the color, the texture, or the reaction to the space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, could we talk a little bit about those layers that you described? There's kind of this contrast between beauty and destruction, it seems to me like. And some of the spaces are damaged in ways that look like, maybe they were bombed, and then some of them just look like maybe they were damaged but then abandoned, and so there's neglect and decay. And also the way that you photograph them, those surfaces, the walls in these buildings are just, they're so rich with texture and color and history and just kind of layer upon layer. I'm thinking of the one of the woman in, I think it's a hotel.
Oh, the Allée, the Grand Allée Hotel. Yeah.
Yes.
The black.
Yes, and with the skirt, with the floral print, and then there's a kind of a painting above. Just, I could stare at that image for days. The different layers on the walls showing all these iterations of what this building maybe has been. And then behind her, like she's behind some kind of frame, and then behind her, it seems like there's a mirror that's also fragmented. I mean, it's just incredible. I don't know if you'd like to talk about that one a little bit.
I'm so glad you saw all that in it. To talk about the layers, Lebanon has a lot of texture. That's kind of all I could describe it. And there's layers of history on these walls. Like even when you walk on the street, sometimes you have a graffiti and then it's covered with ads of some sort. Then the ads start dripping. Then there's a picture of some leader of some sort, and then this kind of thing, and you have an internet kind of ad of where you could get Wi-Fi or something, and you have these kind of, they become almost the fabric of the city.
Yeah.
And the destruction, the layers are also, there's a level of decay sometimes that's not necessarily bombed.
Right.
And sometimes there are places that have been bombed, and you don't know if this is a destruction from left over from the Civil War of this, or is this is something that happened through different wars or the 2006, or
2006.
Yeah, you add it up.
Yeah.
You add it up, and then the port explosions. So the layering is pretty important.
Yeah.
But also, this was a country that was what they referred to as the Paris of the Middle East. So I'm coming back to that hotel, because people used to come from all over the world to these beautiful places, and this hotel is in the mountain in a gorgeous village called the Allée. And I had been to that hotel to photograph before, but I had never discovered that specific room. And I think it was like a bar / kind of a gambling place of some sort. So when I went in with her, it's kind of interesting. Her name is Rania, and I always tell the women, bring different clothes with you, because sometimes I don't know them. I don't know what the space is going to look like. I don't know what the photo shoot is going to look like, and it's nice to have options.
Yeah.
And she had showed me that skirt, and they had the top as well. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't like that at all. Let's leave it in the car. And then we went in that space. And when I all of a sudden saw the whole thing, I'm like, sorry, I'm going to go back at that skirt.
Yeah.
So
because there's a mural type image above her that has a floral aspect to it that really speaks to that skirt. Like it's like they were made for each other.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so this one for me also speaks to the good old days of Lebanon, the beautiful golden age as well. And so this hotel was not bombed. This has just been abandoned and decayed. And during the war, the Civil War, some of these villages would like fight with each other. There'd be a Druze village and a Christian village, and so people kind of fled, and you might see leftovers from wars without them having been necessarily bombed.
And so a lot of these spaces that you're photographing in, they're not rare examples of these really, that's the kind of thing I would seek out and try to find those kind of spaces to photo. But it sounds like this is really representative of the fabric of the place.
Absolutely. But I was seeking them out as well. And I'm so grateful I got access to so many of them, because as things got a bit better before now, somehow a lot of these places some of them I did trespass through climbing over things, but some of them, they really now lock them and you cannot go in. One of them being that hotel.
I wanted to ask you about your relationship with the women that you photograph and how you approach that.
So before I go to Lebanon, I always put a call on Instagram since I started working on this project that I'm coming to Lebanon from this date to this date. I'm working on this project. And if you'd like to collaborate and tell your story, please reach out to me. By then, I had enough that I could show people. And I got a pretty incredible response. And I never asked people to send me their pictures. I mean, this is not like a scouting agency of any sort. And I figured any woman who's going to reply to me is going to be interesting and courageous and creative because it's hard to put yourself out there. So that's kind of how it starts. And then we schedule a time to talk, and I start hearing from them what is their relationship to Lebanon, what it means to them, if there's a place that they'd like to be photographed, and we start from there.
Right.
If they don't have any idea, we typically could pick something that affects all of us, like the Holiday Inn Hotel or locations like that. But then once we go there, I have to establish that trust with them. And I really want them to feel like they have agency, because I feel like if they don't contribute, then it's just me portraying what I want to see. And for me, it's very much this kind of back and forth that happens throughout the shoot that's meaningful.
Yeah, so it does feel more like a collaboration than
Absolutely.
a photographer and a subject.
Yeah. But some of the women who I really, it's like everything in life. There are some women I really bonded with who's like, oh my God, we should do that again or whatever. So sometimes I would reach out to them if I knew I wanted to go to a place that's going to be hard to access and I want to make sure it's going to work.
Yeah.
So I love it that we're able to do that.
Yeah, do you want to talk about an example of that?
Yeah, I talk about the Holiday Inn Hotel. The hotel is kind of this monstrous thing of 28 stories high that's still completely in a state of abandonment, destruction, bullet holes, everything. And when I was growing up, I lived on the 7th floor. We were on a hill, so I could see the Holiday Inn almost straight on. I would put binoculars, and I saw every single room burned, the curtains and the whole thing, one by one. And it's an image for me that stuck more than anything else in the Civil War. The hotel had just finished in 1974. It was like, again, the golden age of Lebanon. Everybody was so proud of it. And it had like on the top floor a restaurant that rotated to show all of Beirut. And in 1976, during the Battle of the Hotels, it started getting destroyed. And it still is in that same shape of utter destruction. And it took me 5 years to be able to figure out how to get access. So when I wanted to get access, I wanted to go with somebody who I know I'm going to get great pictures. And again, it's something that these women were not part of the Civil War, but it's very much part of the backdrop of their lives. It's part of our collective memory. So some of the images also stem from that.
Yeah, that building is like, when you go to it, even as a foreigner, you sense its presence, even if you don't know the story, because it still is quite towering. It's so pockmarked. It's so like, obviously I think there's one big gaping hole on one of the sides, so you can tell that this building has been through hell. And then around it is sandbags and barbed wire, and there's a military presence inside. There are tanks garrisoned inside. Like, the whole thing is basically a de facto sort of little military fort because of this sense of what it represents, So it's not just like sneaking through some boarded windows. This is like literally going
that
in
was
through
serious.
the soldiers.
I had to get permissions, and it was kind of comical because I would send an email. I eventually got to the right person. They need my ID, the ID of the woman who's coming with me, anybody who's going to be with me, exact day I want to go and whatever. And I will send it like 2 weeks in advance, follow up every day. And then, for example, I would ask for it for like the 26th of the month. And I get an email on the 27th telling me that I got access. So
wow.
I go there with my access. They're like, oh, but you can't give it to you because that was for yesterday. So
oh my gosh. Wow. And so let's describe one of those photos from the Holiday Inn with the woman's name's Petra.
Petra, good memory.
Yeah.
Actually, and another thing that was kind of, it's so Lebanon, and you got to love it for that. Once I eventually got access, the army, a couple of them would stay with me, but they were the sweetest thing. And they were so excited to be part of like helping us move things around. Where do you want to go? At some point I found the rug and they would move the rug for me. And then I'm like, well, I really want to go to the top. So it's like
Wow.
There's no elevator anymore, obviously. So it's
my
like a
God.
spiral staircase. And it's me, Petra, and these army guys going up a spiral staircase
Petra,
to the
who's-
top of the
yeah,
restaurant.
And she's wearing this like yellow dress.
Yeah, I have
and,
to say, I
like-
give so much credit to these women. And Petra is standing in the swimming pool. That's, again, you see all the shrapnel and the bullet holes in the pool. And she's standing and looking up. So you see her from the back as if she's all the way at the bottom and looking at this humongous thing. And she's even on her tippy toes. And you see the
dirt at
the
the bottom
dirt
of her
at the
feet.
bottom of her
Yeah.
feet, which I love.
And all around her is this beautiful, like, sort of green blue tile, like the tiling, this really intricate tiling, square tiling of the pool, and then the cinder blocks and all that detritus. Yeah. And then she's sort of almost like looking up, and the horizon line for that is so high because you're in the pool.
Yeah.
And then so you just start to get to see the bottom layers of the building and the bullet holes in them. And you have a sense that there's much more to be seen.
You see that. And what's a little gift that honestly, I mean, there was so much to take in visually that I noticed that as I was editing, that her dress almost matches the grid of the building because it's kind of a very brutalist architecture. It's all out of concrete and
Yeah,
you know.
and she has this bright yellow dress with kind of a white cross
Exactly.
on the back of it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Can you say, you mentioned the Battle of the Hotels, and I think that's something that a lot of people might not know about.
You know, honestly, the Civil War is like a big mystery because people were fighting people and then all sorts of allegiances would shift over the years and you really didn't know who was fighting who at some point. And the Civil War didn't lead to any changes in...
Yeah, no one won the Civil War.
No one won
Yeah.
the Civil War. So people who were fighting against each other, I don't even know who was in which hotel. This is an area that had all the nice hotels. There was like the Riviera Hotel, the Holiday Inn, the Phoenicia Hotel.
Phoenicia,
It was
yeah.
like these beautiful...
The St. George is near
St.
there, too,
George, yeah. There was this kind of beautiful magnet of tourists. It's right by the water. And people would just hide from hotels and shoot at each other. Honestly, this is kind of what, yeah.
Yeah. There was the strategic and symbolic aspects of it, right? There's these beautiful hotels. They're like right in downtown Beirut. They're near the water. And the Holiday Inn being quite tall, is very strategic kind of place to position yourself from. Yeah.
Early in your career, you went to photograph in a Palestinian camp, and was that in Lebanon?
Yes, there were 12 refugee camps scattered around Lebanon. Lebanon at that point was probably a population of about 4 million or 4.5 million, and there are about 500,000 Palestinian refugees. And many of them are now there's probably a fourth generation being born in the
there
camps.
definitely is.
So they're not integrated into Lebanese society, and it's pretty tragic. So I didn't even know that because when I grew up in the Civil War, my circle was tiny, like where I could go, where I couldn't go. And so I didn't know that you could drive about 5-10 minutes towards southern Beirut and end up in a refugee camp, and that people lived in those conditions. In 2002, I went with a cousin of mine who wanted to make a movie about the 20th anniversary of the massacres of Sabra and Shatila from 1982.
These are Palestinian refugee camps.
In the Sabra and Shatila, yes. And I was shocked, actually. And, my father's Palestinian originally, and the Christian Palestinians were able to have a Lebanese nationality. So before my father got married, he did get the Lebanese nationality, which I'm grateful for because I grew up Lebanese.
It would have changed your
It
whole
would have
trajectory
changed,
of your
yeah.
life. Yeah, you would have grown up in a
Because
camp.
you only could
Yeah.
get the citizenship from your father in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it kind of brought me back to I need to tell that story. That's also part of my identity.
Wow.
In the beginning, I was very tentative. And then, every once in a while, you have somebody who gives you some feedback that kind of makes a major change in your life somehow. I was showing my work at what you call a portfolio reviews. And I have images of my children and the early images I had made in the Palestinian refugee camp. And I was sitting with that reviewer, and he told me, you need to get that same intimacy with everybody you photograph as these pictures of your children. And that really talk to me. I use a wide-angle lens. I'm pretty close to people, and I realized I needed to be also close physically and be able to get the right access. So I hope I was able to keep that through all my work. It really resonated. So photographing my kids taught me that, the intimacy, the importance of intimacy, but also the beauty in the mundane, you know?
Yeah. Do you usually use natural light, or do you bring in lights and...
I don't use, it's almost pathetic.
No, it's not pathetic. It's
I
so
only
great.
use one camera and one lens.
And no artificial
No
lighting.
artificial light. I feel like if you want to work, I want to be able to be there.
Yeah.
I don't want to carry stuff or bring assistance or anything. I just want to be there.
Can you explain what a wide-angle lens is, like what that allows?
Yes, sorry. I assume, yeah. A wide-angle lens means I have to be close. Otherwise, I'm going to see everything except the person. So I use the equivalent of what's called a 35 millimeter lens. So it's not too wide as to distort anything, but it's wide enough that I could be sitting, 3 feet from a person, 5 feet from a person, and be able to talk to them and also make the picture. And I feel this was important to me because I wanted to build these relationships.
We've talked some about Lebanon as a subject, I think, of your work, but also your work as a photographer has really focused on women and girls. And I was wondering if you could talk about your approach to that subject matter and how your projects have shifted focus over the years.
My work is very inspired by my daughters, and it feels like it's following them through the ages in a way, almost instinctively. I don't think it's a conscious decision. I first became even a photographer after September 11 to tell a different story of the narrative of the Middle East that we're hearing in the West, the rhetoric of them versus us. And this is not what I know of Lebanon. Even if I grew up during a war, the people are kind and beautiful and hospitable, and we're all being demonized and lumped into one category almost. So I started going back to photograph. And my first book was kind of based in Lebanon, called Ordinary Lives. After that, I decided I want to photograph in the U.S. I live here. I don't want to just be photographing in the Middle East. And I started a project inspired by my older daughter when she was 14 or so, called A Girl in Her Room. I started photographing teenage girls, and it kind of organically ended up being in the girl's bedroom.
Yeah.
And it felt like this is the age where you kind of isolate yourself in there, and the only place you could control, and you could surround yourself with the stuff that means something to you, whether it's a political figure or a rock star or whatever it is. And at some point during this work, I realized that I was exactly like those women so many years earlier, different country, different culture, but there's something so universal about growing up. So I decided to photograph women in my two cultures, really. And this kind of became a consistent in my work. And then I did a project called L'Enfant Femme, which was inspired by my younger daughter right before puberty, and how she's starting to become a woman, but she's also like this child at the same time. And there was such a beautiful awkwardness to that age. And then I became interested in the passing of time and rephotographing these girls a few years later.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, then my older kids, I have twins, went to college, and I became interested in what it means, like the whole mother-daughter relationship. I lost my mother when I was 3, and I'm learning it firsthand with my kids. So I started a project photographing mothers and daughters.
Oh, wow.
But in all this work, till the more recent project, I was photographing mainly in the Middle East and in the U.S. to focus on shared humanity, that we all might be in different places, but ultimately we're all going through the same biological, emotional, physiological changes at the same time. And then I started a project that I was grateful and honored to get a Guggenheim for, that I titled She. And it was the first time that I was really photographing these women, again, the ages of my daughters by then, once they leave home. So it was the first work I did outside the domestic familial space and how they're reacting to the outside world.
As we were wrapping up, I asked Rania if there was anything she would like to add.
I also want to say what's important is often when we talk about war, and now we just talk about numbers and about like 1.2 million displaced, 1,200 people who died. It almost abstracts the effects of the war.
Yeah.
So I hope my images could show some of the faces behind the wars. Some of the women in the pictures are from South Lebanon, and they have been displaced. Some of them probably lost family. So it's important to put that in perspective.
Yeah. I mean, right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
And always.
Hundreds of thousands of people in South Lebanon have been displaced.
Yeah. So some of them are the people whose pictures you're going to see on the walls.
It does have a really big effect when people can see the faces and the spaces and the stories.
Yeah.
Really, really consider the stories of each individual. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with photographer Rania Matar and curator Leila Reichert. Rania's exhibition, Where Do I Go?, is on display at the Sidney and Lois Eskenazi Museum of Art at Indiana University in Bloomington through August 2nd, 2026. I'm Kate Young. More nice work just ahead.
Most people never see the ugly side of filmmaking, the side where the story doesn't come first. The budget does, the target market, the algorithm. And somewhere along the way, the story gets shaped into something sellable.
I was pitching this concept to like a major, player in the kind of streaming and sports storytelling game. And he just looked at me and said, "We don't get to tell the good stories."
That's Kevin Weaver, board member of Common Ground Films.
And we kind of realized, for-profit companies, if they're going to spend like marketing money, that's almost always work for hire in that type of situation. And so the work for hire model didn't really work to fit stories, some of the stories that we were becoming aware of and wanted to tell, things that were especially based on just really interesting and cool people who didn't necessarily fit like a one specific category.
And that's Mitch Hannon, also a board member. Together, they ran into the same problem. They were making documentaries the way most filmmakers do, taking the jobs, working for clients, telling stories that made sense on paper, but some of the stories they really cared about, those didn't have a budget.
And when we realized that there were some stories we wanted to tell that a company wasn't gonna pay for it, we couldn't quite self-fund it, but there were some stories that we felt really strongly about that we felt like we wanted to kind of build that grassroots support for and create a nonprofit to create more stories like the ones that we're dying to tell.
So they built a new vehicle for these stories. They founded a nonprofit documentary company called Common Ground Films.
It's a completely different pitch when we're going for nonprofit funding rather than trying to get a for-profit work for hire type of thing to come on board. It's more of a pitch about, hey, this is something where you can be a part of telling a really, really cool story.
The pitch wasn't buy this story now. It was be a part of telling it.
We are basically the arbiters of how the story is going to be told. Now, we have to rely on the ethics that we've built up. I think our board has pushing 50 years combined experience. We have to rely on our ethics. Our donors have to trust us and our subjects have to trust us to tell that story in an accurate and effective way. One thing I like to say is we're not really trying to change anybody's mind. That's not our goal. We're not out here to change somebody from not being interested in a product to wanting to buy a product. Our goal is to help people understand the human side of other people and the complex human dimension of them more.
And then there's Lonnie, the kind of story that doesn't need a pitch deck. Just one sentence.
He's the first blind person to kayak the Grand Canyon. That was it. That was the log line. And for me, I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that's a film.
That's what got Kevin interested. But it's not the whole story. Because after that, Lonnie didn't stop.
Lonnie kept doing really interesting and amazing stuff. So in between, all of the work that he does, helping other disabled folks and, wounded veterans, we would hear about, oh, he's climbing Kilimanjaro. Oh, he's climbing Denali. Oh, he just climbed Mount Everest. Okay, that's really exciting. And, we started to learn that he was going for this thing called the Explorer's Grand Slam.
To complete it, one must summit the highest peak on all 7 continents and reach the North and South Pole. Only a handful of people on Earth have ever done it.
Only 73 people have done that. None have been blind, and also none were Hoosiers. So as a Hoosier boy myself, I take about as much pride in that as the fact that he's doing it without eyesight.
And somehow, that's still not the most interesting part. Because before all that, there's a guy trying to rebuild his life.
What is it like to, have something terrible happen? He was, shot by a friend in a tragic hunting accident. And then all of a sudden, you have to put back the pieces together of your life.
Imagine that. How do you walk across the room? How do you find your toothbrush?
You rebuilt his life to a point where, he started whitewater kayaking and teaching other disabled veterans or, blind veterans to do that themselves.
That's the story, not the mountains, the rebuilding of one's life.
We started talking with Lonnie, and we just realized that his message is so powerful that we would regret if we didn't try to capture that and spread his message. And that we'd regret that forever. And there's a certain point where we were on the phone and he asked us to help. And sometimes that's what it took. It was like, okay, he wants us to tell this story.
The problem with real stories is that they're still happening. You don't know the ending. You don't know what you missed. You just keep filming.
I think there is a fear, certainly. I mean, it is a challenging to get it all into, a feature-length format, I think is a huge challenge. And also, I think sometimes the challenge is like, oh, we should have captured that. Missing something for me is a fear.
We were excited about this because no matter what happens tomorrow, there is a story today that's really inspiring and I think can really impact a lot of people's lives. We're excited because we think it's getting better and better every day. And you're right, we don't know exactly how it's going to end. We're hopeful that he's going to, put one ski in front of the other and make it to the North Pole. Even should that not happen, the impact that he's had is something that we'd like to reflect and share with the world.
And at a certain point, this stops being a film. It becomes a commitment to a person, to a story, to an outcome you can't control.
I'm comfortable with that now, and I think Mitch is too, with kind of the beauty of documentary. I mean, we know the story beats. We don't know exactly how it's going to come together. I think with editing in general or filmmaking, it's a giant block of limestone. We're going to chisel away at it, and we're going to find what's essential.
Because some stories don't wait for permission. They just dare you to keep up.
There's the story side of it, and then there's this project is a logistical monster in all of the best and worst ways. And so, for example, when we came on, to really start producing this, we're licensing footage from his guide Brian, who climbed Everest with him in Denali and a lot of the other ones. We did not shoot that ourselves, but since we decided to get serious about this project, we've sent a crew to Russia, which was harrowing and challenging in its own way. His guide, Brian, who had gone with him on every single one, said, I'm just not going to go. I'm not comfortable. Lonnie still had this destiny that he wanted to fulfill. He's like, I'm going to Russia. I need someone to go. I need someone to guide me. Yeah. So we helped him find someone to guide and to film. We sent someone to Indonesia to do Carson's Pyramid there. Well, we can't just send anybody. That's a technical climb. There's a point where you have to cross this tight wire connecting two peaks over, 1,000-foot drop. And beyond that, there's some actual technical climbing. So sending somebody to Indonesia to capture that footage. And then, of course, there's the North Pole, which has been elusive. And so when there's a little bit of fear that the North Pole is going to be harder than we want. It gets canceled because of political reasons. The trip was supposed to go through Russia at one point. There's global warming and sea ice melt to kind of deal with. So we're slated for 2027. That's the plan. But I have fear that, I don't know, at some point we're just going to have Lonnie get to swim there. We'll I know he's going to find a way, which is part of the inspiration, behind this story.
Beyond Vision will be the best film that I have worked on, but it will not be the first.
If you want to create something, there's probably not like a savior who's going to come in and fund it for you. And we've learned that. And that's okay. And sometimes you just have to start.
The best way to get good at something is just be okay being fine. Be okay, like make 5 things.
And it's the advice I give students when I'm teaching classes. If you want to make something and you care about it, there's nothing stopping you from moving forward. Whether you do it by yourself or you bring in other people, that's how anything gets done. And in the film world, it doesn't mean, hey, go do things for free, but it means if you really want something to get made, you have to be like Lonnie, like the evangelist for whatever your cause is, for whatever your mission is.
That was Kevin Weaver and Mitch Hannon of Common Ground Films. I'm Jonah Ballard, and this is Nice Work.
This is Nice Work. I'm Tyler Lake, and let's hear a story. It's not my story, but it is a good one. It's the kind of story people make documentaries or write Atlantic articles about. It involves a landfill, a Hollywood screenwriter, a lot of discarded Atari games, and my guest, Rafer Gwynn.
We set up processing tables, and my job was when they would bring artifacts up, I had to identify them, which is kind of easy. It says ET. That's an ET cartridge, right?
Back in 2014, Gwynn worked with a whole team of researchers and a documentary crew to excavate an almost mythical landfill loaded with vintage Atari cartridges in Alamogordo, New Mexico. How's a thing like that even come about? Well, it starts with a guy who thinks a lot about how we preserve video game history.
I wrote a book called Game After. I had a very simple question. I like to think with simple questions. Where do we do game history? And what I meant was, where do we physically do it? Where do we find materials, evidence, documentation? So obviously archives. Mm-hmm. At the time, Stanford and the Strong had a handful of game collections. So people who were in the industry donated materials. Now those collections have grown profoundly, right? Museums. So there's the original brown bears at the Smithsonian. There's a Pong cabinet there. A lot of libraries were starting to introduce kind of console games to turn the space away from a study space to a social space. Mm-hmm. So, okay, games are in libraries. I want to write about that as well. But I thought, okay, museums in the hands of collectors, super collectors. But I thought, wait a minute, landfills. God, I remember that rumor, sort of myth that Atari dumped all of these unsold copies of E.T., right? And there was a beautiful book called Lucky Wonder Boy, W-A-N-D-E-R, by D.B. Weiss. And there's a scene that stood out to me where he's trying to find this game that he can no longer locate or remember. And it's very clandestine. So he's having a meeting in Alamogordo, New Mexico, with this guy in a long trench coat. They walk out and he has photographs of the machine. They're trying to pass these kind of important documents on. And there's an exchange. And this mysterious character says to the protagonist, "You know where we're standing?" Because I think I do. The vault is underneath our feet. And he's referring to all of Atari's trash.
Atari got pretty far out over their skis in the early 80s. Poor sales of the home version of Pac-Man for their 2600 gaming systems were compounded by only selling 1.5 million of the 5 million ET games they made. Stores sent back scads of unsold games of all sorts, and in 1983, it's reported that between 10 to 20 semi-truck loads of Atari ephemera from their El Paso storage facilities were unloaded into the Alamogordo landfill.
So I took this wonderful kind of fiction, and I thought, you know what, I want to do something utterly crazy. I want to go to Alamogordo and see if this is true, right? So I wrote a piece in a journal called Design and Culture, where I put copies of my ET in a landfill and just photographed them for fun. But I interviewed the local mayor. At the time, I went on a country western morning show. I took an ad out in the Alamogordo Daily News, and they put it in the personals column, which I thought was quite funny. It's like, okay, at that time, 30-something, looking for a long-lost, people called in. An old security guard called in, and we talked. Then in Game After, I wrote a chapter. I met a person who recalled taking the games out at the time. So fast forward a little bit, Xbox is doing a documentary. I get an email from Zach Penn, who's putting this documentary, which eventually became Atari Game Over, together. I was still living in New York, so he interviewed me there. And then we went out to Alamogordo to the excavation. And I worked with an archaeology crew. My job was to do photo documentary. And we had an ambitious plan. All the archaeologists, they were talking about, this is going to be pop archaeology. We're doing it for the cameras. We're doing it for a popular audience. So we're going to go through the motions a little bit. What stood out for us was that we saw production runs from 1977 up till around 1982. And I remember this moment very vividly. End of the day, we're tired, we're filthy, we're covered in just stench. Zach Penn has the cameras. What did we do today? Pointing at us, right? What did we do today? I said, well, I jumped into lecture mode and said exactly this. This was never about E.T. This is just a company that is just getting rid of its surplus, getting rid of brand new product. It's not just damaged games. Cut. That's not going into my documentary. This is about E.T. This is about Howard.
Sensationalism.
Yes. Yeah. The sadness as well. I'm pleased on one hand that they.
Well, I just want to back up.
Yeah.
Let's point out that, to my recollection, I've heard these rumors too. E.T. was fantastically a failure.
No, it wasn't. I mean,
that's the story. I get that.
And
it was a bad game and a failure, and that's why this happened.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Set me straight.
Okay, what if I am? I will say this. So in the documentary, I have this line, and I don't know if you've seen Atari Game Over. I say,
not, I will, though.
I would rather play Atari's E.T. than any Call of Duty. That's the line they put in. What I went on to say was, I'd rather play a game about love and sentimentality than U.S. imperialism. They took that part out, right? I got flamed by all of these Call of Duty bros, right? You don't like any of the games? Like, oh God, I just don't respond to that. Here's the funny thing. Why is it such a pariah? Why do we point to that game? I think social media has done the damage on that. When you read reviews at the time, no one's condemning that game. No one's condemning. And the reviews are in kind of specialist video game magazines. It was never debugged. I mean, that's the shortcomings of it. For me, it's a wonderful learning experience. And if one wants to just kind of, I guess, talk trash about it, fair enough. I think social media has fed that quite a lot. Mm-hmm. But there are worse games than E.T. on the market. I was one of those people who did receive it as a 12-year-old and played it. It wasn't one of my favorite games, and it was frustrating. You're always falling into they're called wells, but they resemble pits. So it had some shortcomings, no doubt. But I think it's just, a lot of the toxicity online, it likes to have targets it can kind of direct all of that sort of animosity to. And unfortunately, a game from 1982 kind of bears the brunt of it.
I definitely see like the analog to like when Cyberpunk 2077 came out and they hadn't worked the bugs out.
Yeah. And now, I mean, that game's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what a concept for that. But at first, it was just panned because of glitching. I mean, I could make the same case with New Vegas because I had such a terrible glitch. Fallout New Vegas. I had such a terrible glitch, I couldn't move forward in the game. But of course, now games are patched. At that point in time, the patching technology wasn't available, so games were being returned and just not selling at the time. So what was so, for us, was it was never about a single title. But the story's better if it is about a single title. I get that. We tried to, it was one of these things that I have to be careful sharing this story because on the day I was uploading photos to Facebook. I wasn't supposed to do that, evidently, but I was sharing a lot of this stuff with, the time when Facebook was cooler, I guess, or funner to be on, right? Back then I was doing that and colleagues around the world, oh my God, Ray's doing real archaeology, right? Look at these games, the condition of them. Because I'd written pieces trying to imagine what they would look like. I wasn't quite aware of how, and these arid conditions in landfills, a lot of the games, the pages were crispy. Nothing was damp. Everything was legible. You could move, and games played, which was quite fascinating, right? And I was researching garbology, which is kind of excavating contemporary landfills to understand like consumption patterns and this type of stuff. And I think when we were uploading these photographs, we had a chance to tell our story. There were concerns that we would undermine the documentary. There were concerns that what we were showing would not correspond with the narrative. And I'm kind of proud of this personally as a researcher. That narrative had to change. I remember there's a line where Zach Penn says, we found E.T., but we found lots of other games. I don't know if that line would have been included. So I'd like to think that we were able to kind of influence how the documentary covered that history better.
Thanks to Rayford Gwynn for telling me that story. Rayford and his colleagues wrote a piece about the excavation for The Atlantic that's totally worth checking out. It's called Why We Dug Atari. And Atari Game Over is also a pretty compelling glimpse into the history of Atari and the excavation of the Alamogordo landfill. For Nice Work, I'm Tyler Lake.
And that's our show. You've been listening to Nice Work, a production of WFIU, WTIU, and Indiana Public Media. Find us at ipm.org.
This episode was produced and edited by Alex Chambers. We get production help from Danny William, Holly Wilkerson, Carl Templeton, Leo Pies, Jillian Blackburn, and Jonah Ballard. Our theme music was composed and performed by Alan Davis, additional music from Universal Production Music. The executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Nice work, Alex.
Nice work, Kate.